In 2025, we are talking about a new I Know What You Did Last Summer requel, and I'm here to tell you that this movie is worth your time, even if you're a huge fan of the 1997 original, like I am. Here's my spoiler for your review. So, the original 1997 movie really had a great concept, a great hook, no pun intended, and a great cast to go along with it. And that was my biggest fear going into this movie, was that they weren't going to be able to capture the casting, or they weren't going to be able to capture that essence that the original had. But I'm here to tell you to put those worries aside if you're a fan of the original, or even if you're somebody checking this movie out for the first time. There's a lot to like about this movie, and it's anchored by great performances. They do take some liberties with how our characters get to where they are, but for the most part, they stay true to the original's essence and have that as a strength throughout the whole movie. You can tell that the people making this movie were really a fan of the original 1997, like we were, because you could just tell that on the screen, not only with how they treat our legacy characters, for the most part. I'll get into more of that in my spoiler review coming up. But the thing about it is that these characters, especially Madison Klein and Chase Sui Wonders, who are our two leads for the most part, are fantastic. They're characters that you think are going to be one note throughout the whole movie, but they really evolve. Especially Madeline Klein's character, who I felt like was gonna straight up be just a one note character, but she actually had a great arc throughout the whole thing. And these two leads do a great job. And these aren't just like good teen slasher movie performances. These are just good, solid performances with a script that I think gave certain characters a lot to do, and I think it shows up on screen. The whole cast is great though, and I was really excited to see how they were going to try to fit in how we get back to Southport. How does Ray and Julie kind of come back into play? And they had this really inventive thing where they have this podcaster who has like this murder mystery show, and all the cast are having to come together basically because they're trying to figure out, okay, this happened before, we listened to this podcast. It kind of starts off with like this romantic hookup that becomes like this really integral character in the first act of the film. And I thought that that was like a really fun scene because it plays into one of the best scenes in the movie, which I thought was one of the more tense scenes in the movie. But it was a great way to talk about the 1997, killing spree without just having to shoehorn it in, because there's a mayor in the town that really wants to kind of keep Southport like perfect, and so they've kind of scrubbed everything off social media from that. And aside from that podcast, and aside from Ray and Julie, you wouldn't have even known that this took place. So that was a really cool angle to kind of introduce those characters, to kind of how they can find those characters and how those characters are going to help our cast now. Speaking of our legacy characters, we get a grizzled Freddie Prinze Jr. as Ray, and we get a now Professor Julie, played by Jennifer Love Hewitt, obviously. And I'm always skeptical of how they're going to work in these characters. Are they just going to be there for nostalgia? Are they just going to be there on the poster to get us into the movie? But I'm here to proudly say that they give both of these characters a lot to do in this movie. They are absolutely integral to what happens in this movie, but they don't overshadow the core cast. I felt like the movie did a really smart job by focusing on our new core cast throughout the majority of the first act. And just when the second act starts getting going, are we introduced to Julie and Ray for the first time. And I thought that that was brilliant, because I really felt like us getting to know these characters, especially for me, somebody who really liked the original, I wanted to spend time with these newer characters and kind of get a feel for them. And I can say, once we hit that second act, that's when the movie really starts picking up. That's when we start seeing more of the trench coat and the hook. And that killer design, it doesn't lend itself to the most like intimidating, scary thing, but they actually film this really well. And the direction is really solid here with how they have the characters move throughout the thing, move throughout the scene, and how we have the hook and the trench coat, like with the noises it makes, the big thuds on the ground with the footsteps. There was like this ominous presence. The way they shot it, a lot of stuff like where you're kind of looking up at the killer and stuff like that. I thought a lot of those scenes were really well done. I do wish that we would have seen more scenes, fleshed out more, especially these sequences where it's like the scary sequences or the kill sequences. Aside from that sequence I mentioned earlier that happens pretty early in the film, a lot of the other scenes that introduce the killer, like they're too quick. They don't really build that tension that I like to see in movies like this. And a few of these feel like kind of throwaway kills that just kind of happen. And you're like, oh man, okay, well, I guess that happened, But overall, there's more kills, there's more characters. The pacing on this is way faster and way better than the original 1997 version. And I think that that plays to a strength. I think the one complaint I had from the 1997 version was it does take a little bit too long to get going. The pacing is kind of slower. And for modern audiences now, I think that this is going to be paced a lot better. We get into things a lot quicker with this one, but we're still able to kind of sit with the characters. And there's those kind of quiet slower moments where we get that character development. This movie is more campy than the original. I felt like the original took itself a little bit too seriously at times. Even though I did like how it took itself seriously and it dealt with the grief of everything, it really kind of dealt with the guilt and grief aspect of it, especially for the first half of that film. This one doesn't touch on that near as much. You definitely get that with the Julie character in this, where she talks about trauma and how it affects the body and the mind and everything. But we don't get to sit with these characters and get a sense of the weight they feel or the guilt they feel. And that goes into how we even get here in the first place. That was one of the complaints I have. I won't get into it because it's a spoiler, but they do deviate from how the characters get in this predicament to begin with. And the way that the accident is caused, I thought was a weak point in the movie, simply because I don't feel like it was near as strong of a guilt point as the original had, where you really felt for those characters of like, oh, this is something really like you understood like everything that was going on and why they felt so guilty on that one. This one, it's a little bit different. This one has a lot of humor. I mean, this one has a lot of good jokes. Some characters they play into that, or that typical like arc that you would think for like specific characters, but they play it up for some good laughs. There was a couple of really good laugh out loud moments in this, and I caught myself kind of laughing at a few moments. I just had fun with it, and like I said, the original kind of had a more serious tone. This one does have a serious tone, but it definitely has a lot more humor and a lot more camp to it. And I think that was a huge bonus with this movie, is we kind of got to see that side of the characters, even in turmoil, even in stress, even in very suspenseful scenes. Those characters had that humor and that slice of life kind of feel to it, which I really like. This movie looks like a music video. It's very glossy. It looks great. And on the surface, it looks like it's just going to be this one note movie. Like, oh, it just looks like kind of this like beautiful movie. There's not going to be much to it. There's not going to be much deeper than that. It's just here to look pretty. And I think that that plays to the movie's strength, because we go in with that expectation. And just like with our characters that we thought were going to be one note, this movie blossoms into a really solid slasher movie, and one that I think is worthy of your time, and one that I think definitely earns its place in a modern slasher, when we don't get these movies as much anymore as we used to back in the 80s and 90s. But now this is a good modern reboot, requel slasher film that I think is definitely going to be a hit with the newer generation. And the reason I keep saying 90s slasher movie, I want you to kind of understand the pacing of that, because if you go in thinking that this is going to be a lot of like fast kills, a lot of like just kills every minute or whatever, it doesn't do that. It definitely plays out more like that 90s vibe of a teen slasher movie. You spend a lot more time with the characters. You spend a lot of time with the characters talking about how they're going to navigate all this. You don't see as much of the trench coat and the hook, but when you do, aside from those scenes wanting to be fleshed out a little bit longer, make them more suspenseful, you do get more kills, and some of them are actually kind of gnarly. There's some really cool callbacks, like I said earlier, with that there's a mayor that's wanting to kind of scrub everything off social media to make Southport seem like the great tourist destination. A lot of callbacks to Jaws in that, so I thought that that was really fun and interesting. They kind of played on that with the July 4th weekend, and I thought that that was really funny and a really cool homage to that. And I think that they really did a good job of giving you nostalgic stuff with like some different line readings and some different wink winks to the audience, but it didn't become where this movie was just filled with nostalgia. There's definitely that in there. I can't get into everything because it would involve spoilers, but I will just say definitely stay after the credits for this, because there is an incredible after the credits scene, which feels like the true ending of the movie, and also maybe a hint at a sequel that we could get. So you definitely got to stay for that. But if you're going into this movie wanting to get like really exciting kills or really exciting kill sequences and chase sequences and a lot of horror, you're going to be left disappointed, I think. But if you go into it and you were a fan of the original, or you like the pacing of that, or you like the vibe of that, you're going to get more of that type of movie. This truly is like a modern I Know What You Did Last Summer. It stays true to what they made the original great, and it also carves out its own path, which I think that's all you can ask for in a movie like this. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think there's a lot more good than there is not good in this movie, and I had a great time with it. And I could definitely see myself seeing this one again, and I want to see another one. Hopefully we get that sequel. So I was a big fan of it. I give this a grade B. It could have been higher if for not some major issues I have with the third act. The third act is the weakest part of this movie, and it's one that I can't get into without getting into spoilers. So stay tuned for my spoiler-filled review, where I'll go into all of that and my major issue that brought this down. This could have even been higher of a grade if it wouldn't have been for that last act, which I think is the weakest part of the film. But overall, If you're thinking about seeing this, I definitely would advise to do it. I definitely think it's worth your time, and I definitely think it's a fun time at the movies. Try to see it with a big crowd. Let me know below what you thought about the movie, and definitely stay tuned for my spoiler-free review. Make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss that one. Hit the thumbs up button if you got something out of this review and you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.